The war was over. The last rivals had fallen. Antony and Cleopatra were gone. Their dream of an Eastern empire reduced to dust. The streets of Alexandria, once alive with splendor and ambition, now lay silent beneath the shadow of Rome. And standing at its center was Octavian. At just 33 years old, he had achieved what no Roman before him had. He was the undisputed master of the world's greatest empire. But Rome had seen conquerors before. What it had never seen was a ruler who would claim total power without ever seeming to take it. Octavian knew the fate of those who reached too far too soon. Julius Caesar had worn a dictator's crown and paid with his life. Rome, even in its broken state, would never bow to a king. Not yet. So Octavian chose a different path, not force, not fear, but illusion. In 27 BCE, he stood before the Senate. With solemn grace, he made an extraordinary announcement. He would step down, relinquish his powers, restore the Republic. A hush fell over the chamber. Then, as he had expected, the senators begged him to stay. Rome, they pleaded, still needed him. Its peace was fragile, its enemies still lurked. How could he abandon his duty? Octavian hesitated, considered, and then, reluctantly, he agreed. It was political theater at its finest, a performance worthy of Rome itself. The Senate believed they had preserved the Republic. The people believed their freedoms remained intact, but in truth, the Republic had already fallen. To mark this selfless act, the Senate honored him with a new name, Augustus, the revered one. Not a king, not a dictator, but the first citizen of Rome, a title as old as the Republic itself. Yet behind that humble title lay absolute power. Augustus held imperium maius, supreme command over the legions. No general, no governor, no senator could defy him. He wielded tribunician power, the authority to veto laws, control legislation, and silence opposition. The Senate still met, laws were still debated, elections were still held, but nothing happened in Rome without his approval. Rome did not resist. How could it? The Republic had long been dying, torn apart by corruption, ambition, and civil war. Augustus had simply buried its corpse and built something stronger in its place. An empire veiled in tradition. A monarchy without a crown. One man, ruling alone, and the world would never be the same again. Rome had endured centuries of war, betrayal, and ambition, but now, under the careful hands of Augustus, it was being reforged. No longer a republic torn apart by rival generals, but an empire built on order and prosperity. The blood-soaked sands of civil war had settled, and in their place, a new Rome was rising. Augustus understood that power alone was not enough. An empire needed more than conquest. It needed structure, loyalty, and purpose. So he set out to rebuild Rome from within. His first act was to reshape the military. The chaotic legions of the past, bound to warlords and private ambition, were no more. In their place stood a disciplined professional army, one that served Rome and Rome alone. But power needed protection, and so the Praetorian Guard was born. Officially, they were his bodyguards. In reality, they were the silent enforcers of his rule. Beyond the battlefield, Augustus turned his gaze outward, to Rome's vast and fractured provinces. Corruption had long drained the empire's strength. That too would change. Governors were held accountable, taxation was reformed, and wealth flowed back to the capital, not into greedy hands, but into the foundations of something far greater. Yet Augustus was not only shaping Rome's government, he was shaping its very soul. He saw a people drifting from their traditions, and he sought to restore them. Marriage and family became a duty, not just a choice. Laws dictated morality. Public virtue was no longer private. It was a matter of state. This was more than legislation. It was a renewal of Rome's identity, a binding of past and future. And so Rome itself was reborn. Roads stretched from the edges of the known world to the heart of the capital. Aqueducts carried fresh water to its people. Temples and monuments of marble and gold proclaimed the power of an empire built to last. His legacy could be seen in every column, every avenue, every gleaming monument. Augustus himself would later declare, "I found Rome a city of bricks, and I left it a city of marble." But Augustus's greatest achievement was not made of stone, it was made of silence. For the first time in generations, Rome knew peace. The Pax Romana, an age of stability, prosperity, and unchallenged supremacy, had begun. From the mist-shrouded shores of Britannia to the burning sands of Arabia, Rome stood unshaken. Yet Augustus knew that no empire, no matter how great, could rest on the life of one man. So he prepared for what would come next. He ensured a smooth transition to Tiberius. The empire he built was designed to last, to withstand time itself. But Rome had changed, the Republic was gone, and though its name remained, its spirit had been rewritten. In its place stood something greater, something far more enduring, an empire. The golden age of Augustus had ended. His death in 14 CE did not bring chaos, at least not immediately. He had crafted an empire meant to endure. Every reform, every law, every succession plan designed to hold the world together after he was gone. And yet, no amount of preparation could erase a deeper truth. Rome was no longer a republic, it was an empire. An empire bound not by law, but by the will of a single man. And that man was gone. His successor, Tiberius, was a soldier, a man of discipline, of caution, of bitter experience. But he was not Augustus. Where Augustus ruled with persuasion, Tiberius ruled with suspicion. And suspicion in Rome was poison. Paranoia took root, the air grew heavy with fear, whispers turned into purges, enemies, real and imagined, vanished into the night. Rome watched and understood. The fate of the empire now rested not in its institutions, but in the character of its ruler. Then came Caligula, young, charismatic, the beloved son of Germanicus. Rome celebrated his rise, the people rejoiced, but the cheers would not last. His reign unraveled into madness, wild extravagance, unchecked cruelty, and if the stories are true, delusions of godhood. He was slain by his own guards, stabbed in the corridors of his palace. But Rome was no closer to peace. Next, Claudius, the unlikeliest of emperors, mocked for his limp, his stutter, his bookish ways, and yet he ruled with quiet brilliance. The empire expanded, bureaucracy sharpened, order, it seemed, had returned. But Rome is never kind to its rulers. His own wife, Agrippina, ensured as she poisoned him, so her son Nero could rise, and Nero would be remembered. At first, there was hope. Under the watchful eye of the philosopher Seneca, he showed promise. But power corrodes. Nero sank into indulgence, theatre, music, debauchery. Then came the fire, a city engulfed in flames, its ruler singing on a stage. The people whispered, had their emperor watched Rome burn and played? True or not, the damage was done. His cruelty, his vanity, his madness had gone too far. Declared an enemy of the state, he fled, alone, abandoned, hunted, and with rebels at the gates, he took his own life. His final words, "What an artist dies in me." And with his death, Rome was plunged into chaos. The empire had no clear path for succession, no law, no tradition, no safety net, and so the legions chose. Galba came first, an aging senator, stern, severe, brutal. He ruled with cruelty and made enemies quickly. Betrayed by his own ally Otho, he was slain in the streets, his severed head paraded through the forum. Then came Otho, Galba's betrayer. But far to the north, another claimant rose, Vitellius. The legions marched, Rome bled. Otho, seeing defeat on the horizon, took his own life, hoping to spare Rome further suffering. But there would be no peace. Vitellius took power, greedy, indulgent, brutal. And from the east came the final challenger, Vespasian. A general, a survivor, a man hardened by war, his legions stormed Rome. In the final hours, Vitellius was dragged from his palace, beaten, humiliated, and thrown into the Tiber. The year of the 4 emperors was over. But Rome had learned a harsh truth. The Senate no longer held the empire's fate. Power belonged to the legions, and whoever commanded the legions commanded Rome. Vespasian was no aristocrat. He was not born in marble halls. He was a soldier, a pragmatist. And Rome, after its dance with anarchy, needed that. He restored discipline, stabilized the economy, brought order to a broken capital. But his greatest legacy was not carved in policy, it was carved in stone. The Colosseum, Rome's grandest arena, a marvel of engineering, a symbol of power and endurance. Then came his sons. First, Titus, the compassionate. He reigned briefly, but left a mark. Mount Vesuvius erupted. Fires ravaged the capital, disaster after disaster, yet through it all, he led with dignity, with grace. Then came Domitian, his brother, a darker figure, ruthless, paranoid, calculating. Under his reign, the empire expanded, but so did fear. His cruelty grew, and Rome began to whisper once more. In the end, the whispers turned into daggers. He was assassinated in his own palace, and with his death, the Flavian dynasty ended. Rome had endured betrayal, fire, civil war, madness, and still, it stood, but the scars remained. The past decades had laid bare a painful truth. Power in Rome was an illusion. It did not rest in the Senate, nor in tradition, nor even in the hands of emperors. It belonged to those with the strength to seize it. And yet, the storm had passed. Ahead, lay an age of peace, an era of wise, just, and capable rulers, the five good emperors. But even in times of greatness, shadows linger, and deep beneath the surface, the seeds of future ruin were already planted, waiting for the day they would rise again. In the vast story of Rome, few eras shine as brightly as the reign of the five good emperors. From the rise of Nerva in 96 CE to the passing of Marcus Aurelius in 880 CE, the empire stood at the height of its power. Stable, prosperous, strong. But unlike the emperors before them, these rulers were not simply born into greatness. They were chosen. This was an era of leadership guided by wisdom, not mere inheritance. An age where emperors ruled with reason, with restraint. Rome's borders stretched farther than ever before, defended by hardened legions and fortified frontiers. Within, its cities flourished: law, art, culture, commerce. This was Pax Romana at its peak, a time of order, a time of triumph. And yet, even golden ages cast shadows. Beneath the empire's splendor lay a fragile truth: no system lasts forever. The decisions of these emperors, wise and flawed, would shape the future. Their triumphs and their failures would echo through the centuries. But for now, Rome basked in the glow of its greatest age. The empire Domitian left behind was broken. For years, his rule had been one of fear, of paranoia. He had turned Rome into a city of whispers, where an accusation meant death and loyalty was no shield. And when he was finally assassinated in 96 CE, Rome stood on the edge of chaos. The Senate needed a leader, not a warrior, not a tyrant. They needed a man who could heal Rome. That man was Marcus Caecus Nerva. At 65, he was no conqueror, no legend of the battlefield, but he was wise, respected, a statesman who understood power and restraint. And in this fragile moment, that was exactly what Rome needed. Nerva's first act was to undo the past. He repealed cruel laws, ended treason trials. He welcomed back the exiled and restored the Senate's dignity. A new message was carved into Rome's coins: Concordia exercitum, harmony among the armies. It was a promise, a vow to unite the empire, but words alone could not silence unrest. The Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own protectors, had grown powerful under Domitian, and now they saw Nerva not as a leader, but as weak. Then the unthinkable happened. The Guard mutinied, stormed the palace, made their demands with drawn swords. Rome's emperor, powerless, stood at their mercy. It was a sobering truth. Moral authority was not enough. Power, in Rome, still belonged to those who could command it. But Nerva was no fool. He knew he could not win through force, but he could win through choice. And so he did something that would change Rome forever. He adopted Marcus Ulpius Trajan, a general, a warrior, a man beloved by the legions. With a single decision, Nerva secured his rule. More than that, he set a precedent. No longer would emperors be chosen by birthright alone. From this moment forward, Rome's leaders would be chosen by merit. And in that decision lay the key to Rome's golden age. Nerva's reign was short, just 16 months. He did not lead great armies. He did not build grand monuments. But his impact, enduring. He restored stability, ended tyranny, and above all, he ensured a peaceful transfer of power. By choosing Trajan, he did more than secure the present. He set the stage for an era of unmatched prosperity. His was not a legacy of conquest, but of wisdom. And as Rome moved forward, it did so upon the foundation he had laid. For the empire, the best was yet to come. When Trajan ascended the throne in 98 CE, Rome stood at a crossroads. The empire had endured turmoil, it had weathered instability. Now its fate rested in the hands of a new kind of emperor. He was not born in the heart of Italy. He was not raised in the marble halls of Rome. No, he was forged in the rugged landscapes of Hispania. A soldier, a commander, a man whose very name would become synonymous with strength, justice, and conquest. Under Trajan, Rome would reach its greatest territorial extent. It was an era of ambition, of power, of an empire that believed no horizon lay beyond its grasp. Trajan knew war. He had spent his life at the empire's edge, where civilization met the wild and Roman discipline clashed with chaos. His hands bore the weight of command. His mind understood the burden of rule. But when the aging Emperor Nerva named him successor, it was not just for his victories in battle. It was for his character, fair, respected, disciplined. The Senate welcomed him. The legions revered him. The people saw in him a leader with purpose. He did not seek luxury. He did not rule for indulgence. His ambition was for Rome itself. And that ambition burned brightest beyond the empire's borders, where danger, glory, and destiny awaited. To the north lay Dacia, a land of shadowed forests and steep mountain passes, a warrior people, fierce in their defiance. For years, their king, Decebalus, had humiliated Rome. He struck from the wild, defeated legions, raided Roman lands. To Trajan, Dacia was more than a threat, it was an insult. The legions marched. Roman engineers raised bridges over the Danube, vast and unyielding. Then, battle, Tapai. The clash was brutal. War cries split the air. Smoke blanketed the sky. Dacian warriors, their dragon-headed standards snapping in the wind, fought with savage defiance. But Roman discipline held. The cost was high. But the victory was Rome's. Decebalus sued for peace, but peace was a shadow, fleeting. He rebuilt, he prepared. Trajan returned. This time he would not be denied. Fortresses fell beneath Roman siege engines. Mountain strongholds were crushed, until finally, Sarmizegetusa, the Dacian capital. Flames devoured the city, Roman steel cut through the streets, and Decebalus, he chose death over surrender. His sword found his throat before Roman chains could. Dacia was no more. And from its soil, gold flowed into Rome's coffers. It was a victory immortalized in stone, Trajan's column, a spiral of conquest, glory, and blood. A monument not just to victory, but to ambition. But Trajan's legacy was not built on conquest alone. The wealth of Dacia did not merely fund armies, it built Rome. The Forum of Trajan, a marvel of architecture and empire, colonnades stretching skyward, basilicas echoing with the voices of senators and jurists. Trajan's market, unprecedented in scale, buzzed with trade. He extended roads, strengthened aqueducts, reimagined harbors, the lifelines of an empire. But beyond stone and mortar, there was justice. Trajan created the Alimenta program, a lifeline for Rome's poor, feeding the city's children and offering dignity to the forgotten. He ruled fairly, he built boldly, and for that, the people loved him. But even the greatest of emperors are still men. In his final years, Trajan looked east toward Parthia, a realm of ancient kings, of power and pride. Rome surged forward, city after city fell. Ctesiphon, the Parthian capital, taken. For a fleeting moment, Rome stood on the brink of total dominion, but ambition overreached. Rebellions erupted, supply lines faltered, the empire had stretched too far. Trajan pressed on, even as sickness gripped him, even as death closed in. He would never return to Rome. In 117 CE, he died on the road home. And with him, the age of conquest ended. Yet even in death, Trajan's legacy towered over Rome, literally. His ashes were laid beneath his column, a silent sentinel, carved with the victories of a lifetime. The Senate bestowed upon him the highest honor, a greeting for all who would follow, be luckier than Augustus and better than Trajan. For he had not only conquered, he had ruled with justice, he had dreamed boldly, he had made Rome not just larger, but greater. Under Trajan, the empire stood at its zenith, a golden age forged by the sword and sustained by the builder's hand. Where Trajan's reign surged with conquest, Hadrian's steadied with consolidation. In 117 CE, Rome stood at its greatest extent. From the scorching deserts of Arabia to the mist-laden highlands of Britannia, the empire stretched farther than ever before. But with such vast borders came great vulnerability. Hadrian saw what few dared to acknowledge. Rome's power was immense, but so were the cracks forming beneath it. His rule would not be one of relentless expansion, but of preservation. He would not chase distant wars. He would fortify what had already been won. Hadrian was unlike any emperor before him. A man of intellect and restless curiosity, he was just as comfortable debating philosophy in Athens as he was inspecting Roman legions on the frontier. He was fluent in Greek, deeply immersed in Hellenic culture, and saw himself not just as a Roman ruler, but as a philosopher king. Yet beneath the cultured exterior was a pragmatist, one who understood a harsh truth. Rome's survival depended not on conquest, but on stability. His first major decision as emperor was bold and controversial. He abandoned Trajan's conquests in Mesopotamia, pulling back Roman forces. Many saw it as an act of weakness. But Hadrian knew the truth. Rome was not built to hold every distant land. It was built to endure. Nowhere is Hadrian's pragmatism more evident than in the windswept north of Britannia. Beyond Rome's borders, fierce and untamed tribes had long resisted imperial rule. The legions had fought them for years, yet victory remained elusive. So Hadrian made a bold decision. He would build a wall, not as a sign of retreat, but as a statement. a declaration that Rome would define its own borders, that beyond this line lay barbarians, and here, within Rome's embrace, lay civilization. Hadrian's Wall stretched nearly 80 Roman miles, cutting across the rugged landscape. It was more than stone, more than earth. It was a living, breathing frontier. Manned by Roman soldiers, dotted with mile castles and watchtowers, it stood as a silent guardian, watching over the empire's edge. Even today, its remnants whisper a singular truth. Rome did not conquer the world through brute force alone, but through wisdom, strategy, and the art of knowing when to stop. But Hadrian was more than a builder of walls. He was a builder of wonders. Unlike many emperors who ruled from the comfort of Rome, Hadrian traveled ceaselessly. He walked the streets of Athens, gazed upon the temples of Egypt, and stood beneath the towering arches of the provinces. Everywhere he went, he left behind monuments, not merely of power, but of unity, bridges between cultures, echoes of harmony. In Athens, the city he loved above all others, he completed the temple of Olympian Zeus, a project left unfinished for centuries. He commissioned libraries, markets, and forums, blending Roman grandeur with local tradition. But his greatest architectural achievement lay in the heart of Rome itself, the Pantheon. Rebuilt under his reign, its vast dome, an engineering marvel, seemed to open into the heavens. It was more than a temple, it was a statement. Beneath that dome, all gods were welcome, and perhaps so too were all peoples of the empire. Hadrian was a thinker, a poet, a man drawn to the deep mysteries of philosophy. He walked the paths of the Stoics, debated with scholars, and pondered the meaning of power and mortality. Yet, he was a man of contradictions. At times, he was compassionate, passing reforms that protected soldiers, improved governance, and enriched the empire's culture. But at other times, he was ruthless. Nowhere was this more evident than in Judea. When the Bar Kokhba revolt erupted in 132 CE, Hadrian crushed it without mercy. The war was brutal, the cost devastating. In its aftermath, Judea was left in ruins, its name erased from the map, reborn as Syria Palestina, a final act of Roman supremacy. Even the philosopher king could wield the sword when Rome demanded it. But Hadrian's reign was not only marked by war, it was also marked by love and loss. His affection for Antinous, a young Greek companion, was well known. The two were inseparable, until tragedy struck. In 130 CE, Antinous drowned in the Nile. Some say it was an accident. Others whisper of darker possibilities, a ritual, a sacrifice, a secret lost to time. Hadrian's grief was immense. He did something no Roman emperor had done before. He deified his beloved. Temples were raised, statues carved, a city was founded. Antinopolis, a monument of grief, of memory, of love. Across the empire, the face of Antinous was immortalized in marble and bronze. It was an unprecedented act, a testament to a love that in life may have been whispered, but in death would never be forgotten. Hadrian's reign ended in 138 CE. His health failing, he withdrew to his villa in Tivoli, one final retreat from the empire he had spent a lifetime shaping. But before he left the world, he ensured Rome's future. He named Antoninus Pius as his successor, securing a smooth transition of power. His tomb, the Mausoleum of Hadrian, still stands today. Later known as Castel Sant'Angelo, it watches over the Eternal City like a fortress in stone. Hadrian ruled not with ambition, but with understanding. He was more than an emperor. He was the guardian of Rome's soul. Empires do not endure through conquest alone. They endure through wisdom, through restraint, through the careful tending of what has already been won. Hadrian's walls, his cities, his monuments, they were not built for glory alone. They were built for Rome's survival. And even now, his legacy endures, in stone, in marble, in the ruins of a wall that once divided worlds. Some emperors are remembered for conquest, others for war. But Antoninus Pius, he is remembered for something far rarer, peace. From 138 to 161 CE, Rome stood at its strongest, not because of battles won, but because of battles avoided. His reign was not defined by conquest, it was defined by stability, by prosperity, by the golden calm before the coming storm. When Antoninus ascended to the throne, Rome's borders had reached their natural limits. From the cold cliffs of Britannia to the sands of Arabia, the empire stretched like a titan's embrace across the known world. There was no more room to expand, but there was still much to protect. In the north, he commissioned the Antonine Wall, extending Roman presence deeper into Caledonian lands. It was more than a military barrier. It was a message. Rome would not be pushed back. Rome would endure. Yet Antoninus never led a campaign in person. He governed not from the battlefield, but from the Senate halls, the courts, and the scrolls of law. He was not a warrior emperor. He was a guardian. Antoninus ruled with quiet strength, not through fear, but through fairness. He believed that justice was the true foundation of Rome's might, and under his rule reforms flourished. Orphans were granted protection, freedmen and slaves received legal safeguards, magistrates were held accountable for abuses. Punishments became more measured, more humane. He brought dignity to governance, transforming the empire's legal code into something not just powerful but principled. Justice, not conquest, became the shield of Rome, and under his watchful eye, Rome thrived. Trade routes pulsed with life. Silks from the east, grain from Egypt, glass from Syria, all flowed into the beating heart of the empire. The treasury brimmed not from war plunder but from careful, honest administration. No reckless spending, no crushing taxes. Cities flourished, temples rose, roads stretched farther, smoother, safer. This was an era where the fruits of peace were not merely harvested, they were celebrated. Rome had seen power before, but under Antoninus it saw something even greater: balance. But his true legacy was not in law or gold or marble, it was in his character. Antoninus ruled with patience, with humility, with an unwavering sense of duty. There were no purges, no show trials, no executions born of fear, only calm, only principle, only a steady hand guiding the empire through the quiet waters of peace. Hadrian had chosen him well, and Antoninus had honored that trust, not through ambition but through wisdom. In 161 CE, Antoninus died quietly as he had lived. No civil wars marked his passing, no chaos followed his death. Rome stood whole, at peace, at the height of its prosperity, and waiting in the wings was Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, the stoic who would be tested by fire. But the peace Antoninus forged could not last. Beyond Rome's walls, shadows stirred, plagues, invasions, crises that would test the very soul of the empire. Rome would face the storm, but it would never know an age like this again. Antoninus Pius proved something profound, that the strength of an emperor is not measured by the lands he conquers, but by the peace he preserves, by the justice he ensures, by the world he leaves behind. For 23 years, Rome flourished beneath his quiet reign, a rare chapter in the Roman story where strength wore the face of restraint and power spoke softly. Antoninus Pius was not the most famous of emperors, but perhaps he was one of the greatest. If Antoninus Pius embodied Rome's golden peace, then Marcus Aurelius stood as its stoic sentinel. His reign from 161 to 180 CE was not one of comfort, but of relentless struggle. An era where philosophy clashed with war, where quiet reflection was drowned beneath the thunder of battle. He was the philosopher emperor, a man who did not govern from marble halls, but from the front lines. Marcus was a student of Stoicism, discipline, restraint, duty. These were the pillars of his soul. In the stillness between battles, he wrote his meditations, quiet thoughts scribbled beneath storm-lit skies, reflections on fate, on grief, on leadership. He bore the burden of empire with a philosopher's heart. Yet if wisdom offered him solace, reality showed no mercy. Beyond the Danube, the storm had arrived. The Marcomanni, the Quadi, the Sarmatians, a tide of Germanic tribes poured over Rome's northern frontier, burning villages, razing cities. And for the first time in centuries, even Italy trembled. The legions were outmatched, outnumbered, unprepared. Entire provinces vanished in fire and blood. But Marcus did not issue orders from afar. He rode to war. Through blizzards and blood-soaked plains, he stood with his soldiers, and at Carnuntum they made their stand. Shield met axe, armor shattered, blood soaked the frozen ground. The enemy fell, but so too did thousands of Romans. Victory was earned, but at a cost that hollowed the empire's strength. And yet, amidst that darkness came a moment of legend. A Roman column, trapped, surrounded, no water, no hope. And then, the storm. Rain burst from the heavens. Lightning struck the enemy lines. Roman soldiers, their thirst quenched, surged with renewed fury and turned certain defeat into miraculous victory. Was it divine intervention? A mere coincidence? To Marcus, it was fate, the universe unfolding exactly as it must. But the deadliest foe carried no spear. It came with the returning legions. A plague, silent, inescapable, unlike anything Rome had ever seen. The Antonine Plague, It swept through the empire like wildfire. Cities fell still, markets emptied, funeral pyres burned day and night. Even the legions, weakened and fearful, struggled to hold the line. But Marcus did not flee. He stood with his people, even as the Senate whispered, even as coin lost value, even as fear spread faster than disease, he endured. For what else could a Stoic do? A Stoic does not curse fate. A Stoic accepts it. And so Marcus fought, not just against armies, but against time itself. But even the strongest emperor cannot fight forever. Knowing his end drew near, Marcus made a choice. He named his son Commodus as heir. Was it loyalty? Was it love? Was it hope? Or was it his greatest mistake? For in that moment, Marcus could not foresee that his son would be the spark that ignited Rome's unraveling. In 180 CE, Marcus Aurelius drew his final breath, not as a conqueror basking in triumph, not as a ruler feasting in splendor, but as a man who had spent every last breath holding the empire together. His death marked more than the end of a life. It marked the end of an age. The Pax Romana, the Golden Peace, died with him. And in its place came chaos, where Marcus ruled with wisdom and restraint. Commodus would rule with madness and indulgence. The storm had passed, but the darkness was just beginning. Yet Marcus Aurelius left behind more than an empire. He left behind his meditations, words born not of power but of reflection, words on duty, on virtue, on life, and on the silence of death. He was an emperor who sought not merely to rule the world, but to understand it. And in doing so, he left behind not just a kingdom, but a map for the soul. The Roman Empire at its height was not just a domain of legions and emperors. It was a civilization, a living, breathing world, home to millions. From the chaotic streets of Rome to the quiet heartbeat of the countryside, two vastly different worlds coexisted, bound by a fragile thread of interdependence. Rome, the eternal city, its streets, chaotic, vibrant, alive. Merchants shouted their prices, chariots clattered across uneven cobblestones. The air, thick with the scent of fresh bread, roasted meat, and sweat. Towering insulae, Rome's teeming apartment blocks rose high above narrow streets. Inside, thousands lived side by side, their voices merging into a constant hum. Children played, neighbors argued, life unfolded, cramped, loud, and unrelenting. At the heart of it all lay the Forum, the beating core of Roman society. Here, senators, draped in pristine togas, debated the empire's fate, their voices echoing beneath marble colonnades. Nearby, traders haggled over silks from the east, rare spices, exotic perfumes. Philosophers spoke of virtue. Poets recited to passers-by, chasing immortality with every word. This was Rome's soul, a city of power, of commerce, of ideas, a city of grandeur, but also a city of grit. For the elite, life meant indulgence. Lavish villas with mosaics, private gardens, fountains, and slaves to serve every whim. But for the poor, life was a struggle. Crowded, fire-prone apartments, sickness that spread with a cough, fresh water from aqueducts, but only for those who could pay. And when night fell, Rome transformed. Without streetlights, shadows ruled. Dark alleys became hunting grounds for thieves, gangs, and worse. Still, Rome drew people in, a place where ambition burned bright, where a slave could become a freedman, and a freedman, a citizen, where fortunes were made and lost. But beyond the city walls lay another world, the countryside, vast, open, governed not by laws but by the turning of the seasons. For most Romans, this was home. At dawn, farmers rose with the sun. Fields of wheat, olives, and grapes shimmered in the morning light. Fathers, mothers, children, all worked the land side by side, tied to the earth. To the elite, the countryside was something else entirely, a refuge. They built sprawling villas, complete with private baths, libraries, and courtyards lined with cypress trees, a world of leisure and escape, where hunting replaced politics and deep philosophical musings echoed in shaded porticos. But for the common farmer, the land was both blessing and burden. Life was hard, isolation was deep, neighbors could be miles apart, markets distant, doctors rare, the luxuries of the city, dreams beyond reach. Yet in this solitude, communities thrived, bound by tradition, by faith, and by the promise of the harvest. And when the fields were quiet, the people gathered. Festivals lit up the rural world, celebrations of gods, of the harvest, of survival itself. Music, laughter, roasting meat over open fires. For a brief moment, life was not just labor, it was joy. Urban and rural, two lives, two realities. And yet, they were inseparable. Cities depended on the countryside for food, timber, and raw goods. The countryside needed cities for markets, protection, and trade. And in moments of festival and empire-wide celebration, these worlds merged. Processions filled with rural offerings marched through marble streets. Urban rituals reached out into distant provinces. For all their differences, they were both Rome. An empire not just of conquest, but of life itself. And in the golden glow of its prime, that life flourished. But for how long? Even the grandest cities, the richest fields, the most vibrant civilizations are not eternal. If the grandeur of Rome was built by its legions and emperors, its soul was forged in its arenas of culture and entertainment. The empire thrived not only on conquest, but on spectacle, ritual, and tradition. Festivals echoed through marble streets, the roar of the Colosseum shook the earth, and public spectacles shaped the very identity of Roman life. In these moments, Rome revealed itself, brutal, beautiful, and unapologetically alive. Roman life was a constant celebration. From the marble halls of power to the humblest homes, the empire pulsed with festivals, rituals, and games, each woven into the fabric of daily life. But these were more than just religious observances. They were expressions of Rome's soul, and some were as wild as the empire itself. In December, as winter crept in, Rome surrendered to Saturnalia. For a few days, the rigid order of society collapsed. Masters served their slaves, gifts were exchanged. Feasts spilled into the streets with laughter and excess. A glimpse of a world where hierarchy vanished and revelry reigned. A fleeting moment where even the mighty played the fool. Others were more ancient, more primal. During Lupercalia, priests raced through the streets, striking women with strips of sacrificial goat hide. A ritual of fertility meant to ensure easy childbirth. It was older than the Republic, older than the city itself. A tradition reaching back to Rome's most distant myths. Other festivals honored survival and memory. The Perilia, a shepherd's feast, recalling Rome's pastoral beginnings. The Consualia, a tribute to grain, harvest, and the gods of agriculture. Reminders that food, not swords, built empires. Every festival, whether a grand public rite or a whispered household prayer, tied Romans to their gods, their ancestors, and to the eternal city. But it was in the arena that Rome's love for spectacle reached its blood-soaked zenith, and no arena was greater than the Colosseum. Here, beneath the gaze of emperors and citizens alike, men fought for glory, for survival, for a chance at immortality. Contrary to myth, not all gladiators were slaves. Some were volunteers, seeking fame, fortune, and a place in history. They trained in specialized schools, their bodies honed into weapons of war. Their battles, a brutal ballet of life and death. Every step, calculated. Every strike, deliberate. One mistake could mean oblivion. Yet the games were more than combat. They were theater, ritual, propaganda. A display of Roman virtues, bravery, discipline, and resilience. But it wasn't always man against man. Exotic beasts, lions, tigers, elephants, were pitted against hunters in the Venetians. And sometimes the arena transformed. Massive basins flooded the floor, turning the Colosseum into a sea of war. Gladiators and condemned prisoners clashed in staged naval battles. For emperors, these were acts of political theater, distraction, spectacle, power. For the crowds, it was catharsis, wonder, and awe. A glimpse of Rome's sheer, merciless grandeur. Beyond the Colosseum, Rome's appetite for spectacle knew no bounds. The Circus Maximus, the thunderous heart of Roman sport, chariots tore through the dust. 4 teams, reds, greens, blues, and whites, raced for glory. The charioteers, often slaves, but a single victory could win them freedom. They were the rock stars of their age, their names whispered in taverns, sung in the streets, shouted from the stands. But Rome's love of performance stretched beyond the racetrack. The theatre, a mirror of Roman life. From the biting comedies of Plautus to the dark tragedies of Seneca, Romans laughed, wept, and schemed. The stage was more than art, it was satire, protest, and sometimes sedition. A place where political tension could ignite or be extinguished. Not all entertainment was public. In wealthy villas, dinner parties dazzled, wine flowed, poets recited, and philosophy filled the air. In smoky taverns, the working class rolled dice, gossiped, and debated their favorite gladiators. And in the great bathhouses, steam filled the air, alongside the buzz of politics, scandal, and whispered deals. Roman entertainment was not just leisure, it was power in motion. A tool of emperors to win the people's love or distract them from suffering. For citizens, it was escape, a moment to forget their burdens and lose themselves in wonder. but beneath the grandeur lay darker truths. The games, displays of dominance. The festivals, reminders that the gods, not men, held the threads of fate. The races and theatre, stages of both freedom and control, where voices could rise or be silenced. Entertainment in Rome was life, distilled to its purest, most vivid form. Triumph and tragedy, hope and horror, beauty and brutality. And as long as the empire stood, the spectacles never ceased. For Rome was not just a city of power, it was a city that lived through the roar of its people. If Rome's might was forged in war, its endurance was carved in stone. Roads stretched beyond the horizon, aqueducts defied gravity, amphitheaters roared with the voices of the masses. These were not just marvels of construction, they were the skeleton of an empire built to last. Where others built for rulers, Rome built for function, for efficiency, for eternity. At the heart of Rome's grandeur flowed something deceptively simple: water. No empire before had mastered it on such a colossal scale. At its zenith, Rome boasted 11 aqueducts, spanning over 250 miles, delivering an unprecedented river of fresh water into the city's beating heart. And they did it with only gravity. The Aqua Appia, Rome's first, born in 312 BCE. But it was the Aqua Claudia and the Anio Novus that stood as pinnacles of Roman hydraulic genius. Towering structures, some soaring 100 feet into the sky, funneling millions of gallons into bathhouses, fountains, and homes. Yet the aqueducts were more than stone and water. They were a statement. To build an aqueduct was to proclaim civilization itself. Even in distant lands, Gaul, Hispania, North Africa, Rome ensured that clean water and with it, Roman culture flowed freely. All roads lead to Rome, not poetry, engineering reality. Rome constructed over 250,000 miles of roads, a vast, durable network that stitched the empire together. Unlike the dusty paths of lesser peoples, Roman roads were layered masterpieces. Crushed stone at the base, compacted gravel in the center, and tightly fitted paving stones at the crown. Built to endure, built for speed. A Roman legion could march 20 miles a day in full armor. At the heart of this network stood the Via Appia, the Queen of Roads, a lifeline from the capital to the port of Brundisium. Along these roads, milestones rose, way stations buzzed, and inns welcomed weary travelers. In a world where travel was slow, perilous, uncertain, Rome's roads brought order, efficiency, control. Wherever Rome went, entertainment followed. The Colosseum, completed in 80 CE under Emperor Titus, remains an immortal testament to Roman engineering. 50,000 souls could gather within its towering walls to witness blood, glory, and discipline in motion. Gladiatorial combat, animal hunts, public spectacles. Every roar, every clash, echoed Rome's ideals. Yet the Colosseum was not alone. Across the empire, from Carthage to Londinium, amphitheaters rose from the earth. Each one a beating heart of Roman life, each one stamping Roman culture into foreign lands. Beyond the arenas, Rome's public spaces showcased its soul. The Forum Romanum, a sprawling complex of temples, basilicas, and bustling markets, was the empire's political and commercial epicenter. Here, politicians thundered, citizens debated, deals were struck, and destinies decided. In the grand bathhouses, like the Thermae of Caracalla, Romans didn't just bathe. They networked, philosophized, plotted, and dreamed. Even Rome's insulae, the towering apartment blocks, revealed a city that had mastered high-density living. An empire built both for emperors and for the common man. Rome's feats of engineering were not just relics of a lost world. They were blueprints for the future. Its aqueducts inspired modern water systems. Its roads became the skeleton of Europe's highways. Its arches and domes shaped the cathedrals of the Renaissance and the skylines of today. Even now, in every bridge crossed, in every stadium built, in every road paved, Rome's spirit lingers. A silent, enduring testament to an empire that, though fallen, never truly disappeared. Rome's military might, its engineering marvels, these are the stories that often define it. But behind the legions, behind the towering aqueducts, another force was at work: science and medicine. The Romans were not philosophers like the Greeks, they were pragmatists, innovators. Every discovery had a purpose. Every advancement was designed to serve the empire, to strengthen it, to sustain it, to make it endure. Rome's obsession with hygiene was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The aqueducts that stretched across the empire weren't just triumphs of engineering, they were lifelines. Millions of gallons of fresh water flowing daily into fountains, homes, and the grandest of them all, the public baths. The thermae, heated by roaring underground furnaces, were more than places to bathe. They were social hubs, centers of business and politics. And though the Romans may not have fully understood disease, they knew one truth: clean water meant a healthy people. But Rome didn't stop there. Beneath the city's streets, hidden from sight, ran the Cloaca Maxima, an enormous sewer system that drained waste, kept the streets clean and the air fresh. A system so far ahead of its time, the medieval world would one day forget it and pay dearly for the loss. Rome's empire was built through war, but war leaves scars. With every conquest came the wounded, men who needed care and needed it fast. And so the Romans created something extraordinary: valetudinaria, the world's first military hospitals. Not makeshift tents, but permanent, carefully planned structures, built near forts and battlefields, staffed with highly trained medici. Roman doctors wielded tools that look familiar even today: scalpels, forceps, bone saws. They disinfected wounds with wine, an early step toward antiseptics. They performed amputations, extracted arrowheads, even operated on cataracts. And on the battlefield itself, they pioneered a radical idea: triage. The most urgent were treated first, a simple, vital principle that still underpins modern medicine. While Rome mastered practical healing, its knowledge was shaped by older hands, Greek physicians like Hippocrates, and one towering figure who would change medicine forever: Galen, a Greek doctor who became personal physician to Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Galen studied the human body as none had before. He mapped the circulatory system, explored the mysteries of the nervous system, and theorized about disease itself. His work would dominate medical thought for over 1,000 years, long after the fall of Rome. Long after emperors had turned to dust, Galen's words lived on. But Roman medicine was more than scalpels and stitches. Physicians crafted potent herbal remedies: honey for wounds, vinegar for infections, opium derivatives to ease pain. Their pharmacology was remarkably advanced. And then there were the gladiators, men who fought and bled for spectacle, whose survival depended not just on strength, but on healing. To keep them fighting, Rome pioneered early physiotherapy, massages, stretching routines, exercises to rebuild torn muscles and broken bones. They didn't just treat injuries. They engineered recovery. Rome's aqueducts fed the empire, its roads connected it, but its medical innovations shaped the future. From sanitation systems to battlefield surgery to hospital care itself, Rome's influence endures. Even today, in sterile operating rooms, in bustling emergency wards, in every place where healing hands work against death, the lifeblood of Rome still flows. Rome was more than an empire of conquests and legions. It was a center of artistic brilliance, a forge of ideas that would shape civilizations long after its fall. Its art reflected power, its philosophy guided life. And though it borrowed from Greece, Rome made it unmistakably its own. The Greeks sculpted perfection, godlike figures, flawless and eternal. But Rome? Rome chose truth. Its artists embraced verism, a style that captured every wrinkle, every scar, every hardship. A Roman leader's portrait was not meant to be beautiful. It was meant to be real. A statesman's bust bore the weight of duty. A general's likeness carried the marks of war, and when Rome celebrated its victories, it carved them into stone for all to see. Trajan's Column, a spiraling monument of battle scenes, told the story of Rome's relentless conquest of Dacia. Not with myth, but with memory. Yet Roman art wasn't only about war. Step into a villa in Pompeii or Herculaneum, and the walls come alive. Frescoes of mythological gods, rolling landscapes, and glimpses of everyday life. Look down, and the floors bloom with mosaics, gladiators locked in combat, lavish feasts bursting with food and wine. Beyond private homes, Rome proclaimed its greatness in public monuments. The Ara Pacis, an altar to peace, celebrated the empire's golden age. The Arch of Titus, towering over the streets of Rome, etched the sack of Jerusalem into the heart of the city, both a warning and a declaration. Rome had conquered, Rome endured, Rome would be remembered. If art was Rome's mirror, then philosophy was its compass. Rome inherited much from Greece, Plato's idealism, Aristotle's reason, but it was Stoicism that defined the Roman soul. Stoicism preached discipline, resilience, acceptance of fate. It was the philosophy of Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius. For a Roman, life was duty. Pain was inevitable. But suffering, that was a choice. And so, in the solitude of his military campaigns, Marcus Aurelius wrote words that would outlive the empire itself. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. But not all Romans sought virtue through hardship. Some turned to Epicureanism, a philosophy of peace and pleasure, free from fear. The poet Lucretius, in his masterpiece De Rerum Natura, described a universe governed not by capricious gods but by natural laws, rational, indifferent, eternal. Yet perhaps the most Roman of all ideas was civic humanism, the belief that true glory came not from indulgence but from service. Cicero preached it. The Republic thrived on it, and for centuries Romans placed the needs of the state above themselves. The empire may have fallen, but its art, its philosophy, they endured. Roman sculptures and frescoes would ignite the Renaissance. Its philosophy would guide the minds of medieval scholars and Enlightenment thinkers. And even today, in the modern world, Stoicism finds new life in leadership, in self-discipline, in the pursuit of resilience. Because Rome was never just a city, it was an idea. And ideas never die. Rome was a city of laws, a city of legions, a city of marble and triumph. But beneath it all, Rome was a city of gods. Their presence was everywhere, etched into statues, whispered in prayers, carved into the very foundations of the empire. Religion was not just faith, it was duty, the unseen force that bound Rome together, shaping its laws, its wars, and the destiny of its people. To be Roman was to worship, to sacrifice, to honor the gods and trust that their favor would keep Rome eternal. At the heart of Roman faith stood a pantheon of gods, borrowed from Greece, but forged anew in Rome's image. Jupiter Optimus Maximus, king of the gods, ruler of the skies, guardian of Rome itself. His temple on the Capitoline Hill was more than a sanctuary, it was a symbol of Roman supremacy. Victorious generals marched there first, offering thanks before basking in the glory of their triumphs. Beside him stood Juno, protector of the Roman state, and Minerva, goddess of wisdom and war. But the gods did not dwell only in marble temples. They were present in every home, in every fire, in every whispered prayer before battle. Every Roman home, whether a senator's palace or a simple farmer's hut, held a lararium, a shrine to the Lares and Penates, spirits of hearth and family. Each morning, simple offerings, bread, wine, incense were placed before them. A quiet ritual, yet one that kept the household within the gods' favor, for to neglect the gods was to invite misfortune. Beyond the private hearth, the city itself was bound by sacred duty. At its heart stood the Vestal Virgins, priestesses of Vesta, goddess of the eternal flame. 6 women, chosen as children, sworn to 30 years of service. Their task was simple, yet vital, to keep Rome's sacred fire burning. For if the flame died, it was said, so too would Rome. And if a Vestal broke her vow of chastity, the punishment was severe. Buried alive, entombed beneath the very city she had sworn to protect. Rome's calendar pulsed with festivals, sacrifices, and sacred games, a careful choreography of faith and spectacle. During the Ludi Romani, held in honor of Jupiter, the city became a stage for the gods. Chariot races thundered through the Circus Maximus. Gladiators clashed beneath the watchful gaze of the divine. The people feasted in Jupiter's name. And then came Saturnalia, the festival that turned Rome upside down. Slaves dined as equals with their masters. The streets rang with laughter, gift-giving, and revelry. For one brief moment, the rigid order of Rome dissolved into joyful chaos. Yet for all its splendor, Roman religion was not merely belief. It was power. It was politics. In Rome, the gods did not stand above the state. They ruled alongside it. The Pontifex Maximus, Rome's highest priest, was no cloistered holy man. He was a political force, often a senator, sometimes even an emperor. Augustus, Rome's first emperor, understood this well. He revived ancient rituals, restored crumbling temples, and cast himself as the restorer of Roman faith, a ruler favored by the gods. Later emperors would push the bond between power and divinity even further. Some, like Domitian, declared themselves living gods, a claim that inspired devotion and whispered rebellion. For centuries, the gods of Rome reigned unchallenged. Their temples rose across the empire, from the windswept forts of Britannia to the sun-baked cities of Egypt. Their statues towered over forums, markets, and battlefields alike. But even as Rome basked in the favor of its gods, a quiet revolution was stirring in the shadows. At first, it was barely noticed. Small gatherings, silent prayers, a faith that refused to bow before Rome's gods. It did not seek power, it did not demand sacrifices, and yet it spread. A faith that rejected Jupiter, Juno, and Mars, that denied the emperor's divine authority, that worshipped one god and one god alone. The rise of Christianity had begun, and Rome's gods would never reign unchallenged again. Rome had conquered nations. It had crushed rebellions, it had silenced threats, but now a new force was rising, a force with no armies, no banners, no weapons, and yet it terrified the empire. At first it was ignored, then it was feared, then it was hunted. But no matter how fiercely Rome struck, Christianity would not die, it would only grow. Christianity did not emerge alone. Its earliest followers were Jews, a people shaped by centuries of exile, of conquest, of resistance. In Rome's eyes, the Jewish people were a restless and defiant presence, tolerated but never fully trusted. By the time of Emperor Hadrian, Rome's patience was wearing thin. Then came 132 CE. The simmering tensions in Judea erupted into open rebellion, the Bar Kokhba revolt. Led by Simon Bar Kokhba, the Jews rose in a desperate bid to reclaim their homeland. For 3 years, they fought with unyielding ferocity. Hadrian's response? Merciless. He unleashed his finest legions, his most ruthless generals. And he did not simply defeat the rebellion, he erased it. Hundreds of thousands were slaughtered, entire cities were reduced to rubble. Jerusalem was renamed Aelia Capitolina. The Jews were banned from even setting foot in their holy city. Judea itself was stripped of its name, replaced with Syria Palestina, a calculated insult meant to sever the Jewish people from their past. It was a wound that would never fully heal. Yet even as Jewish resistance was crushed into the dust, another faith was taking root. One that would challenge Rome not with swords, but with something far more dangerous, an idea. Unlike the Jews, Christianity had no homeland, no armies, no temple of stone. And yet, it posed an even greater threat, because to be Roman was to honor the gods of the state, to offer sacrifices, to swear loyalty to the emperor, not just as ruler but as a living god. Christians refused. They rejected the pantheon. They denounced idol worship. They would not kneel to Caesar. To Roman officials, this was not faith, it was treason. The first great persecution came under Nero. In 64 CE, a fire engulfed Rome. The city burned for 6 days and 7 nights. Whispers spread that Nero himself had set the flames. Needing a scapegoat, he turned his wrath upon the Christians. They were arrested, tortured, executed with a cruelty so savage that even Rome recoiled. Some were burned alive, their bodies lighting Nero's gardens at night. Others were thrown to wild beasts in the Colosseum, their screams drowned by the roar of the crowd. And yet, the faith endured. More persecutions followed. Domitian hunted Christians who refused to worship him as a god. Trajan decreed that any Christian who refused to renounce their faith must die. Even Marcus Aurelius, Rome's philosopher-emperor, saw Christianity as a threat to order and permitted brutal crackdowns. The message was clear. To follow Christ was to invite death. And yet, Christianity refused to die. No matter how many were crucified, burned, or torn apart by lions, the faith grew. It spread through the catacombs of Rome, where believers gathered in secret by the light of flickering lamps. It whispered through marketplaces, across viads, into the homes of soldiers, slaves, and senators alike. Because Christianity offered something Rome could not. It promised hope, in a world where the poor and the powerless were so often forgotten. It preached equality, in an empire built on hierarchy and conquest. It spoke of a kingdom beyond Rome, a realm where emperors held no dominion, where the suffering of this life was but a passing shadow. And for those who had nothing, that promise was everything. By the 3rd century, it was undeniable. Christianity was no longer a fringe movement. It had taken root in every corner of the empire. Rome had tried to crush it with fire and blood. Instead, it had only made it stronger. The Roman Empire stood at the height of its power, a vast colossus stretching from the wind-swept shores of Britannia to the sun-scorched sands of Egypt, from the roaring Atlantic to the fertile heart of Mesopotamia. Its cities gleamed with towering aqueducts and grand temples. Its legions marched unchallenged. Its emperors ruled as masters of the known world. And yet, beneath the polished marble of its civilization, fractures had begun to form. Small at first, hardly noticeable, but in time they would widen into deep fissures, cracks that even Rome's might could not mend. The golden age of the Pax Romana was beginning to fade. For centuries, Rome had thrived on conquest. Its legions carved out new provinces, its coffers overflowed with the spoils of war. But expansion could not last forever. The empire's borders had reached their natural limits, and the cost of defending them grew heavier with each passing year. The once mighty legions, who had humbled kings and crushed Carthage, were stretched thin. Their ranks, once filled with disciplined citizen soldiers, now swelled with mercenaries, foreign recruits whose loyalty was not to Rome but to coin. Economic strains deepened. The rivers of wealth that once flowed from conquered lands slowed to a trickle. In their place came crushing taxation, inflation, unrest. The vast machinery of governance, once Rome's greatest strength, began to falter. The Senate, once the Republic's guiding force, had become a den of corruption. Magistrates and officials no longer fought for Rome's future, only for their own gain. Political stability wavered. The careful balance between emperor and senate tilted toward unchecked autocracy. The days of rulers like Augustus and Trajan, leaders who tempered absolute power with duty, were fading. And in their place came emperors who saw the throne not as a burden, but as a prize to be hoarded and indulged. Beyond Rome's borders, old enemies stirred. In the east, the Parthians remained a formidable force. In the north, the Germanic tribes, once divided and fearful, grew stronger. The walls of Hadrian's Britain, the fortresses along the Danube, the great defensive lines of the Rhine, all stood as fragile barriers against an oncoming storm. But perhaps the most fateful moment in Rome's history did not happen on the battlefield. It happened in a dimly lit palace hall. In 180 CE, the philosopher-emperor Marcus Aurelius lay dying. His reign had been one of wisdom and duty, a beacon of stability in uncertain times. But as death crept closer, he made a decision that would echo through the ages. Instead of choosing a worthy successor, as the 5 good emperors before him had done, he named his son, Commodus, as heir, a young man who cared more for gladiatorial games than for governance. A ruler Rome did not need. His reign would be a disaster. Extravagance, paranoia, corruption, the Senate humiliated, the treasury drained, the dignity of Rome mocked. For the first time in nearly a century, the empire teetered on the edge of chaos. Historians would later mark this moment, the transition from Marcus Aurelius to Commodus, as the beginning of Rome's long descent. The golden glow of the Pax Romana faded, and the long shadow of decline stretched ever closer. Yet Rome was not doomed. Not yet. For now, it remained the unrivaled master of the Mediterranean, a civilization of unmatched grandeur. But the tides of history had shifted. In the centuries to come, emperors would rise and fall. Civil wars would rage, and the enemies Rome had long held at bay would breach its mighty walls. The empire that had once seemed eternal was now a titan, walking an ever-narrowing path, its destiny no longer certain. The days of conquest were over. Now, Rome would have to fight, not to expand, but to survive. The sun had not yet set on Rome, but its golden glow was fading. In the year 180 CE, Marcus Aurelius, the last of the 5 good emperors, drew his final breath. His reign had been one of wisdom, duty, and sacrifice, holding the empire together through war, plague, and unrest. But with his death, the balance he had fought so hard to preserve collapsed. Rome still stood, vast, proud, unrivaled. Yet beneath its polished marble and towering arches, cracks had begun to form. And with the rise of his son, Commodus, those cracks would soon become fractures. Commodus was not his father. He was no philosopher, no soldier, no leader. He was a performer. A man intoxicated by his own image, draped in lion skins, wielding a wooden sword, not in the halls of power, but in the arena. While he played at being a gladiator, the empire decayed, corruption spread, the treasury bled. The Senate, once the guardian of Roman tradition, became an audience, forced to applaud the whims of a delusional emperor. Paranoia consumed him. He saw enemies in every shadow. Suspicions became accusations. Accusations became executions. And so, his closest allies turned against him. On the final night of 192, Commodus was strangled in his own palace. His death was inevitable. But with it, the last fragile thread of stability snapped. A throne without a master. A prize for the strongest. 5 men, 1 empire, a single year. The year of the 5 emperors had begun. One by one they rose, and one by one they fell. Assassinations, betrayals, civil war. Rome was not ruled, it was fought over. The legions no longer served the empire, they served ambition. And in the end, one man emerged victorious, Septimius Severus. Severus was no statesman, he was a soldier, ruthless and decisive. Where Commodus indulged in fantasy, Severus dealt in brutal reality. He restored order not through consensus, but through force. He trusted not the Senate, but the army. And in doing so, he changed Rome forever. Power no longer rested in tradition, it rested in the hands of the legions. But loyalty had a price, and that price was gold. Severus raised military pay, lavished rewards upon his soldiers, and drained the treasury to keep them satisfied. When he died in 211 CE, he left the empire to his sons, Caracalla and Geta. Brothers, but not allies. Caracalla did not share power. He murdered Geta in cold blood. His reign was marked by cruelty, excess, and fear. Yet he left behind one lasting decree, the Constitutio Antoniniana, a proclamation granting Roman citizenship to all free men across the empire. Meant to unify, it instead diluted what it meant to be Roman. Caracalla's rule ended as it began, in blood, a dagger in his back. The Severan dynasty staggered forward. Rulers came and went. Macrinus, the boy emperor Elagabalus, and finally Alexander Severus. One by one, they were made emperors, and one by one, they were discarded. The empire still stood, but it was no longer stable. Beyond Rome's walls, enemies stirred. To the north, Germanic tribes gathered, no longer scattered clans, but unified, growing forces, watching, waiting. To the east, a new empire had risen, the Sassanids, stronger, bolder, far more ambitious than the Parthians they replaced. They no longer feared Rome, they challenged it. Within, the empire strained. Inflation soared, taxes rose, the gap between rich and poor widened. The legions, once Rome's greatest pride, had become its greatest threat. Their loyalty no longer given freely, but bought with coin. And when that coin ran dry, their swords turned inward. Ambition festered. Generals no longer saw duty, they saw opportunity. Then, in 235 CE, the final blow fell. Emperor Alexander Severus stood on the northern frontier, facing the Germanic threat. But his soldiers saw only weakness, a ruler unworthy of command. And so, they turned on him. He was not slain by barbarians, but by his own legions. And in that moment, the illusion of stability was shattered. The imperial line was broken. The order that had bound Rome together dissolved. What followed would be unlike anything the empire had ever faced. The crisis of the 3rd century had begun. It began with a single murder. In 235 CE, Emperor Alexander Severus fell not to a foreign enemy, but to his own soldiers. His crime? Restraint, diplomacy, choosing reason over bloodshed. But the legions had no appetite for patience. They hungered for conquest, for plunder, for a leader who would feed their ambitions. Instead, they plunged Rome into an abyss. With his death, the last illusion of order crumbled. No longer would emperors be chosen by birthright or by virtue. Now power belonged to the blade, to the strongest, to the most ruthless. Thrones were seized in battlefields, in dark alleys, in whispers of betrayal. In 238 CE, Rome spiraled into madness, the year of the 6 emperors. Generals, senators, warlords, rising and falling like dying stars, each one ruling for days, for weeks, before meeting the same fate: murder, betrayal, oblivion. The empire itself began to tear apart. One Rome became 3. In the west, the Gallic Empire. In the east, the Palmyrene Empire. And in the heartland, a crumbling Rome, gasping for breath. Borders vanished, loyalties fractured. What was once a unified colossus became a wounded animal, thrashing against its fate. And while Romans slaughtered Romans, the world closed in. From the north, hordes of Goths, Vandals, and Franks crashed across the frontiers. Towns were put to the torch, cities gutted. Legions overwhelmed, no wall was high enough, no river wide enough. From the east, the Sassanids struck with a fury unseen since Hannibal. In 260 CE, King Shapur I dealt Rome its gravest humiliation. A Roman emperor, Valerian, was captured alive, dragged in chains, paraded like an animal. Some say he was used as a footstool, others say he was skinned, his hide stretched and displayed as a warning to all who dared defy the East. However, he died. Rome would never forget the shame. But Rome's wounds ran deeper than the sword. Civil wars drained the treasury. Trade routes vanished. Once great cities fell silent. Desperate emperors debased the currency, flooding the markets with coins that gleamed but carried no worth. Inflation spiraled into madness. A day's wages could not buy a loaf of bread. Wealth dissolved into ash. And then, as if cursed by the gods themselves, came pestilence, the plague of Cyprian. Some said it was smallpox. Others whispered of a deadlier scourge. No matter the name, its touch was death. Whole towns wiped out, legions crippled. In some places, half the population vanished. The streets of Rome, the once great eternal city, became rivers of bodies. By the closing years of the 3rd century, Rome was a dying giant. There was no order, no law, no future. 26 emperors would rise and fall over the next 50 years. Few died of natural causes. Most were butchered, poisoned, or torn apart by their own men. The empire teetered on the edge of annihilation, one breath away from falling into history's grave. But from the ashes, from the bleeding soil of a broken world, one man rose, a soldier, a reformer, a savior, or a tyrant, depending on who told the tale. His name was Diocletian, and he would reshape Rome or die trying. The storm was not over, the darkness had not lifted, but for the first time in a generation, Rome had found a hand to seize the reins of fate. The battle for the empire's very soul had begun. Rome had survived the storm, but it was weakened, shattered, exhausted. For half a century, emperors had risen and fallen like waves in a tempest, each one more fleeting than the last. Civil wars had turned generals into warlords. The empire itself had nearly torn apart at the seams. If Rome was to endure, it could not return to the old ways. It needed a new order, a system that could not only survive chaos, but prevent it. That vision belonged to one man, Diocletian. Rising to power in 284 CE, Diocletian understood a truth that had eluded his predecessors. One man alone could no longer rule Rome. The empire had grown too vast, too complex, too fragile. No single ruler could guard its borders, repel its enemies, and hold together its restless provinces. So, he did the unthinkable. He divided the empire. 2 Augusti, senior emperors, would rule the east and west. 2 Caesars, junior emperors, would serve as their heirs and deputies. Power was no longer absolute. It was shared, balanced, distributed. Diocletian ruled the east from the rich city of Nicomedia. Maximian governed the west, Rome and North Africa. Constantius Chlorus, Caesar of the west, held Gaul and Britannia. Galerius, Caesar of the east, protected the Balkans. It was a government of 4 men, 4 thrones, 1 empire. For a time, it worked. Rome stabilized. The borders held. Civil wars, once constant, ceased. It was order, at last. But power, once divided, is rarely shared forever. Diocletian had built a system that could withstand crisis. But could it withstand ambition? For 20 years, the Tetrarchy held Rome together. Then, in 305 CE, Diocletian did the unthinkable once more. He stepped down, voluntarily. He withdrew to his palace on the Dalmatian coast, tending gardens as the empire passed into new hands. But in Rome, power was never meant to be shared, and it was never meant to be given away. Within a year, the Tetrarchy collapsed. Ambition returned. Rival emperors turned on each other. Civil war erupted once again. And from the ashes rose one man, Constantine, son of Constantius Chlorus, raised in the empire's core, trained as a warrior, shaped by war. When his father died in 36 CE, his legions hailed him as emperor, but so did others, many others. A brutal struggle began, nearly 20 years of blood and betrayal. Against the odds, Constantine crushed his rival, Maxentius. Before the battle, he saw a vision, a sign in the sky. In this sign you shall conquer. The Chairo, a Christian symbol. He marched to war under the banner of Christ. Constantine faced his last great rival, Licinius, ruler of the East. In a decisive victory, Constantine shattered his armies and claimed the empire for himself. After nearly a century of division, Rome had one ruler, but Constantine's vision extended beyond victory. He would not merely rebuild, he would recreate a new Rome. In 330 CE, at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, he founded Constantinople, a city of wealth, of walls that no enemy could breach, a city destined to outlive the empire itself, the eternal twin of Rome. For 1,000 years, Rome had been bound to its gods, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, the divine guardians of empire. But the old gods were fading, their temples crumbled, their power waned. A new faith had risen, one that had survived persecution, that had endured the wrath of emperors, and now would be embraced by the throne. 313 CE, the Edict of Milan. For the first time, Christianity was legal. The followers of Christ were no longer fugitives. They were protected, empowered. Constantine went further. He poured wealth into Christian churches. He built basilicas, St. Peter's in Rome, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. He convened the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, uniting Christian doctrine through the Nicene Creed. The gods of Rome were dying, and in their place a cross now stood. But change comes with loss. As Christianity rose, paganism fell. Temples lost their followers, sacred rites faded. Priests, once stewards of empire, drifted into obscurity. By the end of the 4th century, under Theodosius I, Christianity was Rome's official religion. The empire of Jupiter, of Mars, had become the empire of Christ. Rome had changed, its rulers had changed, its gods had changed. But beneath it all, cracks remained. Cracks no emperor, not even Constantine, could mend, and soon the empire's final days would begin. By the dawn of the 4th century, Rome still stood. It had endured the storm, barely. The crisis of the 3rd century had scarred it, broken it, almost buried it. But from the ashes rose one man, Constantine, a warrior, a reformer, a visionary. Under his command, the bleeding was stanched, the legions revived, the empire reborn in a new image. The old gods still watched from crumbling temples, but at Rome's heart now stood the cross. And the city of Rome itself? No longer the empire's pulse. That honor had shifted east to Constantinople. A gleaming city forged between worlds, Europe and Asia, a new capital for a new age. It seemed Rome had conquered its past, that it had emerged stronger, wiser, eternal. But it was an illusion. The wounds had not healed, they had only been hidden, and beneath the surface, new fractures were already forming. In 337 CE, Constantine died, but he left behind no singular heir, only sons. 3 of them. 3 rulers, 3 ambitions, 1 empire. It could not last. Jealousy festered, alliances fractured, brother turned against brother. By 350 CE, the bloodshed ended, not in peace, but in silence. Only one son remained, Constantius Tech, paranoid, ruthless, alone. He ruled a weary empire, drained, brittle, and beyond Rome's frontiers a storm was rising. A storm it could no longer contain. For centuries, Rome had held back the barbarian world, with swords and with silver. But now, from the east, came something different. Something terrifying. The Huns. They swept across the steppe like wildfire, scattering kings, toppling cities, driving whole nations westward in panic. One of these, the Goths, arrived at Rome's border, desperate, starving, pleading for sanctuary. And Emperor Valens let them in. Tens of thousands crossed the Danube, but mercy soon turned to betrayal. Roman officials extorted them, starved them, humiliated them. Some were forced to sell their children for food. Desperation turned to rage, and rage to war. Valens, hungry for glory, marched to crush them, alone. He refused to wait for reinforcements. He trusted in Rome's invincibility. But on August 9th, 378 CE, near the city of Adrianople, that illusion was torn apart. The Roman legions marched in perfect form, but the Goths had prepared, their cavalry hidden, struck like thunder. The legions were surrounded, crushed, obliterated. By nightfall, 2/3 of Rome's army lay dead. Valens vanished. His body was never found. Adrianople was not just a defeat, it was a reckoning. For the first time in living memory, the myth of Rome's invincibility was broken, and its enemies had seen the truth. Rome needed a savior, and for a fleeting moment it had one. Theodosius, a soldier, a diplomat, a realist. He knew the empire could no longer fight on every front, so he struck peace with the Goths. He gave them lands, not as conquered subjects, but as allies. It was a solution, but it set a dangerous precedent. For the first time, foreign tribes lived within the empire's walls, not as Romans, but as a nation of their own. And Theodosius's legacy reached further still. A devout Christian, he sealed the fate of Rome's ancient faith. In 391 CE, the Theodosian decrees were issued. The temples closed, the fires of Vesta extinguished. The Olympic Games ended after 1,000 years. Rome, once the empire of Mars and Jupiter, now bowed to the cross. Theodosius died in 395 CE, and with him, the final breath of a united empire. His sons, Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west, took the throne. In name, they ruled as one. In truth, they ruled in isolation. The east, rich, fortified, enduring. The west, weak, fractured, bleeding. And the barbarians, they were no longer outside the gates. They were inside them. Rome had not yet fallen, but its fall was no longer a question. It was only a matter of time. The storm had come, and the empire would never be the same again. The fall of Rome was not a cataclysm. It was a whisper, a slow unraveling, a death not by sword or fire, but by rot. This was the empire that ruled the known world, that paved the wilderness with roads, that bent kings to its will and crowned itself eternal. But long before the barbarians crossed its borders, Rome was already bleeding. By 476 CE, the Western Roman Empire was no more than a ghost, a shell, a city of marble crumbling from within. Corruption choked it, war drained it, and despair became its pulse. Rome, the beating heart of an empire that had stretched from Britain to Babylon, was now a city under siege, not just by enemies, but by time itself. How did it come to this? How does an empire that once believed itself immortal decay into dust? Long before the final invasion, Rome had turned on itself. Not a foreign foe, not an army at the gates, but a sickness in the soul. The empire had grown too vast, the system too brittle. Its rulers greedy, paranoid, and blind to the storm. What had once been a war machine, disciplined, ruthless, efficient, was now a cannibal, a beast that no longer conquered, only consumed. Rome's wealth had always come from conquest. New lands, plundered cities, enslaved labor. But conquest had limits. With expansion ended, the gold stopped flowing. The lifeblood of empire dried up. In desperation, they debased the currency. Coins of tin and copper passed off as silver. Inflation spiraled, trade routes vanished, gold disappeared. And the people? They paid the price. Crushing taxes strangled farmers, land lay fallow, villages withered. The engine of empire sputtered and died. Rome, once fed by the riches of the world, now starved on its own soil. Once Rome was ruled by visionaries, by law, by order, by the Senate and the people. Now, it was ruled by the sword. From 235 to 285 CE, 50 years of anarchy, over 20 emperors. Most fell to daggers before they saw winter. Civil war followed civil war. The throne was not earned, it was seized. And every man who took it bled the empire a little more. The empire had no shepherd, only wolves. And while Rome tore itself apart, the world outside waited. Rome's legions once marched from ocean to desert, iron in their hands, victory in their wake. But now their numbers were thin, their loyalty thinner still. With Roman citizens unwilling to serve, Rome turned to the very tribes it once called enemies. Barbarians became mercenaries, mercenaries became legions, but they fought not for Rome, they fought for coin. And when the coin ran dry, they turned on the hand that fed them. The sword of empire was now pointed inward. For centuries, the eternal city had held, its legions stood firm, its walls had never fallen. But that time was over. The world beyond Rome had changed. The tribes of the north were no longer scattered raiders, they were nations on the move, fierce, united, hungry. The storm was coming, and Rome would not weather it. They had once been allies. They had begged Rome for refuge, but Rome's promises were empty, its arrogance boundless, its generosity extinct. Alaric, king of the Visigoths, had heard enough. In 408 CE, he marched on the Eternal City. For 2 years, Rome stood surrounded, abandoned by its emperor, rotting from within. And then, the gates opened. For the first time in 8 centuries, a foreign army walked the streets of Rome. They did not spare it. Temples were looted, palaces burned, statues fell, thousands died. The world watched in horror. If Rome could fall, what was left unshakable? Rome barely had time to breathe before the next blow fell. From across the Mediterranean came the Vandals, seafarers, raiders, builders of a fleet from the ashes of Carthage. They sailed not as warriors, but as executioners. Rome, leaderless and defenseless, offered no resistance. For 2 weeks they stripped it bare, bronze from the statues, gold from the temples. Even the treasures of the Senate vanished into foreign hands. They left only ruins and a name. Vandalism, a legacy of destruction written into language itself. And then came the Huns. They were not like the others. They did not want to conquer Rome. They wanted to erase it. Led by Attila, the scourge of God, they swept westward. Cities were burned. Survivors were rare. Rome found one last champion, Flavius Aetius. At the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, Rome's shattered alliances held barely. Attila turned away, but only for a moment. In 452 CE, he marched into Italy. City after city fell. Rome stood next. But then came a man with no army, no sword, Pope Leo I. What passed between them is lost to time. But Attila turned back. Rome had been spared. Not by force, but by faith. Yet even miracles could not restore a dying empire. Britain abandoned, Gaul and Spain lost. New kingdoms rose where Rome had once ruled. Franks, Visigoths, Saxons. The Roman world dissolved into fragments, each one a step away from empire, each one a nail in the coffin. By 476 CE, the Western Roman Empire was no longer an empire, just a carcass picked clean by warlords, its corpse propped up by fading symbols. The last man to wear the imperial purple was no conqueror, no statesman. He was a boy, Romulus Augustulus, a child placed on a broken throne, ruling nothing, commanding no one. And then came Odoacer, a Germanic general, once a soldier of Rome, now its final executioner. He did not storm the gates with fury. He simply walked into Ravenna, the empire's last hollow capital. There was no battle, no resistance, no call to arms, only silence. The boy emperor was dethroned without a fight. Odoacer took the crown and sent it east to Constantinople. A message wrapped in quiet finality. There is no emperor in the West. There is no Rome left to rule. And with that, the Western Roman Empire was dead. There was no last stand, no blazing glory, no Spartacus to rise, no Caesar to avenge. The Senate, once the voice of 1,000 years, raised no protest. It simply faded. The legions that had once marched to the edges of the earth, gone. The roads that once bound the world together, cracked and broken. Rome did not fall with a roar, it crumbled into dust. In 476 CE, the Eternal City died, not in flames, but in silence. No empire lasts forever, not even Rome. For 1,000 years it had shaped the world, with its legions, its laws, its language. But even the greatest fall. And when Rome fell, it did not explode. It faded into silence, into ruin, into memory. The Eternal City had not been eternal after all. Rome had outlived gods and kings, survived plagues, fires, and betrayal. It had endured Hannibal at the gates, Caesar's ambition, Nero's madness. But in the end, Rome did not fall with a cry. It slipped away with a sigh, not by enemies, but by the loss of what made it Rome, its unity, its soul. And so it passed into legend. A warning to all empires that follow, that no matter how mighty, all things built by man must fall. Rome was gone, but its shadow never vanished. Its laws shaped kingdoms, its language echoed in cathedrals, its ideals lit the fire of nations yet to be born. Rome did not truly die, it transformed into memory, into legend, into something greater than stone or steel. And as centuries passed, as new powers rose and fell in its wake, one truth endured: Rome was not eternal. But its legacy was. The Roman Empire has long since faded. Its marble temples have crumbled. Its legions are echoes, dust caught in the wind of time. And yet, Rome has never truly died. It lives on, in the laws that govern us, the words we speak, the ideals we chase. An empire that once ruled the known world, now rules the imagination of the world it left behind. Rome was never just a civilization. It was a force, a heartbeat in the story of humanity. And that heartbeat never stopped. In the 5th century BCE, Rome carved its laws into stone, the 12 tables, so that no man, no consul, no king could bend them. Later, the Justinian Code preserved these principles for 1,000 years more. And from those stones came the foundation of justice we still stand on today. Innocent until proven guilty. The right to a fair trial, due process, property rights, contract law. These are not Roman relics, they are Roman gifts. Living, breathing parts of modern civilization. When justice is served, Rome still speaks. Latin did not vanish, it transformed. It became Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian. It became the universal tongue of religion, of diplomacy, of reason. It whispers in our medical texts, it orders our laws, it sings in our expressions, carpe diem, veni, vidi, vici, etc. Latin is the language of Rome's soul, and it still speaks. Wherever you walk, in London, in Paris, in Washington, D.C., Rome walks with you. The arch, the dome, the vault, these were Roman inventions. Roman concrete held up wonders like the Colosseum and the Pantheon, still standing after 2 millennia. Modern stadiums mimic their arenas. Capitals rise in their image. Highways follow their ancient roads. Rome built the blueprint. We still build upon it. Rome's influence was never contained by its frontiers. Its laws, its art, its spirit flowed outward, into the British Empire, into the American Republic, into the very idea of Western civilization. The Renaissance brought its art back to life. The Enlightenment drew on its reason. And in every century since, its stories have refused to die. Gladiator, Spartacus, HBO's Rome, Total War. Rome remains, reborn in every retelling. Because Rome was never just a place, it was an idea, and ideas do not fall. Rome's writers, Virgil, Cicero, Tacitus, still shape how we think, how we speak, how we remember. Cicero's rhetoric birthed modern politics. Livy and Tacitus created the discipline of history. Virgil's Aeneid is still studied, still felt, and in philosophy, Stoicism became Rome's compass. Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, their teachings still guide those lost in chaos. You can buy Meditations in any bookstore, because Roman wisdom, it never went away. It waits for those willing to listen. Rome's rise, its glory, its fall. It's more than the story of a fallen empire. It's the story of us, of power and fragility, of creation and collapse, of ambition, identity and legacy. Rome represents a dream, the human dream of greatness, of meaning, of leaving something behind that will outlive us. And as long as we write laws, as long as we build cities, as long as we speak of history, Rome will never truly fall. Because time does not forget, it waits. Beneath stone, behind scroll, between the spaces where history blurs into myth. You've heard the whisper now. And once heard, it cannot be unheard. The past has chosen you to wonder, to question, to seek. If her voice stirred you, let it guide others here. Follow the path. Leave a sign, share your thoughts, let your echo join the rest. Subscribe, not for us, but for the stories yet untold. You've heard the whispers, now walk forward and let history remember your name.